Hello, this is Barrett from Cypress College, and in this video today, we're going to cover the Security Plus Lab series, Incident Response Procedures. And if I go ahead and scroll down to the contents, you can see a general overview of this lab. So the very first part, we're gonna pretend to be a malicious threat actor, and we're gonna set up a phishing campaign using social engineering toolkit, very handy tool for that type of exploitation. And we'll be using a Java vulnerability to take advantage of that. And essentially, we'll be opening up a malicious URL or link in our Ubuntu box. So we'll, of course, always be using the Kali machine as the attacker. The Ubuntu box will be the victim. And then in the other portions of the lab, we're going to be collecting that data directly on the Ubuntu machine, and then analyzing that and viewing those logs. So this is a good example of, this Ubuntu machine has various indicators of compromise, and we want to be able to gather as much information about that as possible, especially network connections. And in this case, we're going to see that the Ubuntu is actually going to send back a reverse shell to this Kali machine. So we should be able to see that in our incident response procedure. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to load up the Kali machine here first. And you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and get logged into the Ubuntu one. I believe this is secure password. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So back to the Kali machine. First thing we need to do is open up terminal and run a command called Ifconfi. And this is essentially just getting the network configuration, network adapters that you're using on this box, right? So we see that we have the ETH0 network adapter, but in order to do this lab, we need to set up the loopback interface. And that's because we need to set up a web server. And to do that, all we need to do is type ifconfig lo up. And then if you type ifconfig again, you now see that the lo loopback interface is now running. And now we have to do two things. I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen. We just have to start two different services. One is Apache, which is our web server. So service Apache 2 starts. And we see that that is good. And then we also want to start a Postgres database. So service PostgreSQL starts. And that is good as well. Cool. So not hacking yet. We essentially just started the services that we need to use social engineering toolkit. So now we will load that up by typing se toolkit. And if you scroll up a bit, you can see that this security tool was created by TrustedSec. Highly recommend checking them out online if you use Twitter, trustedsec.com. Very handy tools that they distribute, and also news and things like that. Definitely a good follow. But in this lab, what we're going to do is essentially set up what is a phishing attack. And we'll have a malicious URL that we're not going to actually send an email, but you just kind of, use your imagination. The fact that, well, how else would this malicious URL be distributed to the person, likely through an email phishing scam? So we'll choose social engineering attacks, number 1, and then website attack vectors. And for this one, we're going to do the Metasploit browser exploit method. And we'll go ahead and choose a web template. Social engineering toolkit is very handy if you're good with HTML, or you could do a site cloner, but you can do custom imports. You can create very customized landing pages for your phishing attempts. Okay, web templates, we'll go ahead and choose that. And for NAT port forwarding, we'll just say yes. So IP address to set web server. This is going to be 203.0.113.2. And essentially, if we look here, that is our Kali machine. So 203.0.113.2. Is your payload handler on a different IP? We'll say no. And here we want to take advantage of a Java vulnerability. So we're going to do the Java required #1. And for here, lab would like us to do #9. So essentially, at this point, if you use your imagination again and think back, like how would we know how to choose this? Well, obviously we must have done some reconnaissance. Maybe we did some Nmap scanning, or we just found that this particular user, or found that this particular user is running a browser that would be vulnerable to this Java 7 applet remote code execution. So we'll go ahead and choose 9 for this. And this is our payload. So this is essentially when the vulnerability is exploited, what is the payload that is run? And that's going to be the Windows shell reverse TCP. So I'm going to choose #1 here. Okay, port to use. Lab is asking us to do 6666, quad 6s. This could be pretty much anything you want. So feel free to play around with that. Okay, and now it is launching. So you see it's cloning the website. And this may take just a couple minutes, so I'll pause the video and come back. Okay, so it looks like the server has started. We have the local IP. So this is essentially the IP address and port number that we'll want to load on the Ubuntu machine. And this here is, if we really wanted to make this look good, we would set up a DNS entry, maybe set up a URL, do some typo squatting, or a URL that might look like a legitimate URL rather than just sending an IP address. But once again, we'll just want to use our imagination a little bit here. And also, I just wanted to point out, if you scroll up a bit, you can see this is where we started. It started cloning the website. It found Apache. So it moved all those files into the appropriate location in the Apache web folder. And then you can see it also, because we chose that Metasploit exploit option, it actually loaded Metasploit and continue scrolling. It set up all of the options necessary, the listening host, which is the Kali machine, the port that it's listening on. And then remember, once the payload is executed on the Ubuntu machine, it's going to send a reverse shell. It's going to execute a shell command back to this listening host. So right now we are in a state of listening. We're waiting for anybody to visit this website and potentially run this payload. So with that said, let's come over to our Ubuntu machine. So just consider this the victim machine. We'll want to open up Firefox. But here, let's pretend that we got a very, very convincing email scam, right? And we clicked on a link and it took us here. So we'll enter in the IP address of the Kali machine, port 8080. And so nothing has loaded here yet, but you see Firefox has prevented the outdated plugin Java from running. But let's say it was so convincing, we're like, I really want to know what this is all about. You choose allow, and then you say allow now. And then, well, shoot, still nothing happening, right? And now at this point, you might start to think, oof, maybe this was a phishing scam. Maybe this is not legit. And then you contact your security team. You contact IT, for example. You put in a help desk ticket. Now, when we come back to the Kali machine, our attacker machine, you see Meterpreter session 1 opened. So this means we had success, right? And in fact, let's go back to the Ubuntu machine. If we launch terminal and we use the netstat command, netstat-nao, and I'm going to pipe and grep for the specific port number that we would essentially be sending out on. And also just to explain what's happening with this command. So we're running the netstat command. In fact, you know what? Let me run this first without piping and grepping. So if we run netstat-nao, this is showing us all of the current TCP connections that are happening. There we go. So you can see it's quite a lot to scroll through. Now, let me clear the screen. If we rerun this, and when you use the pipe command in Linux, it's basically saying take the contents of this command, which is in Linux terms is called standard output. Take that standard output, send it into a new command, and that command is grep 6666. And grep is essentially a great way to search for a particular string. So we're searching the output of this command and looking only for the quad sixes. Let me press enter. Now you see much simpler output. We only have one line, and we can see that this is our internal IP. We are sending out of the dynamic port 44315 to the Kali machine on port 6. And that connection is established. So that is an established TCP connection. And we could also see that here on the Kali attacker machine. And so now that we have that sessions open, at this point, we are no longer in Social Engineering Toolkit. We are now in Metasploit, right? So if we type sessions, we see active sessions, interpreter, student at Ubuntu. We can see that we're connected from our attacker machine to the, this would be considered the public IP of that Ubuntu machine. And so from within here, we could do a lot of things. So sessions-I this is to interact with session number 1. And now you see we have an interpreter prompt. And so we get a bunch of information here. So let's do sysinfo. Actually, first, before I do that, if you type help, always, you should get used to when you're using new Linux tools for the first time. Always just run help to take a look at all of the different things you can do. So we'll be doing, whoops, sorry about that. You can record mic, take screenshots, run lists of running processes, which we'll do, get system information, get the user that the server is running as. You can run those ifconfig commands to display interfaces, route tables, all sorts of things. So let's go ahead and do some of those. So sysinfo. All right, so we know that this Ubuntu machine running this specific Linux kernel, and get UID, username is student. Let's take a look at running processes. So we can see everything that's running there. Firefox, we can see that. That makes sense. And we can take a screenshot. And you can see that it is saved at this location. We should probably be able to take a look at that. Let's see, user, share, SCT, was it SCT? Oh, SCT toolkit. And that one was FCH. Yep, there's our screenshot. So you can see how that works. Scary stuff. And we could also download files. So let's say if I wanted to enumerate this a little bit more, see if there are other users on this box. So I could download the etc password file. So this is where usernames are stored. If we wanted to go a little step further, we could also download the shadow file, which is where Oh, operation failed, probably because student doesn't have the permission. So at this point, if we really, what I was going to say is the shadow file contains all the password hashes. So if we want to do password cracking, that's what we would want. So in this case, we'd have to do a little bit of privilege escalation and attempt to get, root level access. But outside of the scope of this lab, PWD, present working directory. So in the student home folder there. Okay, so we've done some malicious things. We have that established connection right now. So now let's move into step 2, which is collecting this volatile data. So this is where maybe we're answering. Remember, I mentioned maybe the user got scared and they're like, I loaded up this site and nothing happened. I think I might have got phished. Now, the incident response team is replying to that help desk ticket, right? And maybe they're remoting into this machine and they're going to work from the command line here and gather information about the system. So let's go ahead and move to root level privileges because we will need them to gather some of this information. So we'll run sudo su. The password is secure password. Okay, so now you can see that we're actually, you can see that we're using the root account now rather than the student account. And we're to do all this within command line, and I'll explain some of these commands as we go along. So using the echo command, all this is doing by itself is echoing whatever string I type here. So student investigator. Notice that if I press enter, it literally just echoes out that information to the screen. This is taking standard input and then echoing it to standard output in Linux terms. Now, if I press up, I could bring up that last command I just ran. Now, what we want to do is instead of echoing that out into the terminal, we want to redirect it using this caret command into a file called report.txt. Now you notice when I press enter, nothing outputs. And if I do ls to list, we see report.txt. We can verify that student investigator text was added to it by using the cat command. And that will display the contents of that text file onto the terminal. So you can see there, it was added into that text file. So the idea here is we're just going to keep populating this report.txt with system information so that we could do further analysis on it. Now, this is an important part here because now we want to add the current date, right? Now, it's important to do 2 carets because this is saying to append to report.txt. And if I do cat report.txt, you can see that it appended it to the next line. If I would have just had 1 caret there, it would have completely overridden the student investigator. So just keep that in mind. The very first one, you do just 1, but then from that point on, you need to make sure that you're appending to the text file rather than overwriting. Okay, so now let's just keep adding information. So uname-a is going to add some very important system information. Hostname. Ifconfi again, and we'll do a -a for a little bit more information. So this is going to give network interface information about this system. The good old netstat -a and o. We won't do the grep this time because, as an incident responder, you want to see as much of the full picture as possible. Obviously, at this point, you wouldn't have known which port number may potentially be sending out on. So you really have to do your due diligence and look at everything. Okay, so we'll send that over. We'll do a list of running processes. And routing table is very important. threat actors love to manipulate the routing table, maybe do some man-in-the-middle attacks, things like that. And then, so now that we've collected everything we need, let's just timestamp that once again with another date command. So that's basically saying we started the report here and we gathered all this information, and then this is when we ended it. So timestamping is very important in incident response and log analysis. You want to make sure that all of your systems are also running on the same time, maybe using network time protocol, port 123, things like that. And now let me clear the screen here. We can take a look at what this report is looking like. And instead of pressing enter and just, is this going to be a long report? Let's pipe this into the less command. And this is going to allow us to press spacebar every time we want to scroll down to the next page. So cool. So you can see student investigator, the dates, system information here. We see the output of our ifconfig command here. We can see this is our netstat, all the active established connections. You can also scroll down with your mouse as well, but you could also keep hitting spacebar. So you can see we have a lot of information here. This is looking like list of running processes at this point. Okay. Now to get out of this, we could just press Q or Control Z, I believe, would work as well. All right, so that is our report. Now there would potentially be other logs that you may want to look at, like the Authlog. And generally, Linux logs are located in /var/log. And then we can take a look at the Authlog, pipe that into the less command. So we could see potential authentications here. And another point of interest might be the BTMP log file. So this shows failed login attempts. I don't believe we're going to see any, but it's good to know where this resides. BTMP. Okay, yeah, so you don't see anything in there. And then also there is a WTMP log file, which records who is currently connected to the system. So this is something we potentially want to check as well. Okay, and then we see that the student is still logged in. And this could definitely be something you want to consider. You know, maybe this is after hours, maybe it's really late at night, and you know that this person's whose box this is wouldn't be logged in. So if you see activity, see current sessions at unusual times, this is where this could definitely come in handy. Cool. So that covers all of the objectives of the lab. So just a review. In the very first portion, we crafted a phishing scam. We crafted a payload that would, when exploited through a web browser, it would create that reverse shell. So, oops, we had a reverse shell from the Ubuntu machine. We launched that website, loaded the Java plugin that executed that vulnerability. And then we reverse shell back to the attacker machine, right? And then from that point, we took a look at some information. We saw how we had that backdoor access to the Ubuntu machine from the attacker Kali machine. And then we moved on to actually collecting volatile data, you know, net stats, system information, all of those things. And then how we could also view some other logs of interest. Great. Well, thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you in the next one.